Okay, so let us begin the 14th of Sivan with Hayom Yom. Today's Hayom Yom is all about the talus. So you may wonder, how is this appropriate for women on the call who are not wearing a talus? He won't say, but I'll say a couple of words after we get through the basic. So the basic is dressing the talus. First of all, a man puts on in the early morning before the talus gadol, a talus cotton. And he does that. His hands have to be clean, which there's a metaphor, right? The hands are the hands that you dig in with your hands. And you can dig into dirt, you can dig into light, you can dig into whatever, right and left. So there has to be a sense of purity that you approach the putting on of the talus with clean hands. And you do it in a place where brachos may be used, as the idea of where brachos may be said. That's another notion of purity. And then you recite the bracha al mitzvahs tzitzis, concerning the mitzvah of putting on the tzitzis. It's only said, and then the hatef batzitzis, which means to wrap yourself in the tzitzis, is only said for a large talus that has the size for enwrapment, lisatef, to enwrap, completely encircle you. If one may not say a bracha when putting on the talus cotton, because it's in a place where you can't do it, then before davening, you finger the four tzitzis, you put on the talus cotton, and before davening, you touch the four tzitzis and say the bracha then. However, if you're going to now put on the talus gadol, so you just put on the talus gadol and you don't say the bracha on the talus cotton. So very briefly, in Hasidus, the talus is a metaphor for the or hasoive, the all-encompassing light, and the or panimi, which is the invested light. The talus is pretty obvious. It completely surrounds you from top to bottom. And it has tzitzis. And the tzitzis are counted. There have to be a particular number of tzitzis. These are strands. So the tzitzis is the or hasoive, the all-encompassing light. And the tzitzis, that's the talus, and the tzitzis are the or mamali, how God fills and channels things into separate things, which is our topic. How it is that allness comes into separateness or dividedness, or how it is that oneness comes into multiplicity. And the talus is a model for that. So that is our subject, actually. The conundrum that we talked about yesterday, how it is that there is only God, and yet at the same time, there's an infinite number of separate different things. So we start today in Lessons in Tanya on page 867. And in Likutei Moharan, yes, Likutei Moharan, we start here in the middle of page 158. Now, we had a nice discussion yesterday about this topic of collapsing the paradox being, on the one hand, God is infinite, and yet at the same time, he manifests himself throughout every detail of finitude, of finiteness. So, just a little brief. We started talking about the Ein Sof, which in simple meaning is he's without end, which poses a problem, which is wherefore, and how do things which have limits appear. And we put on the table a concept, a notion called Hester Panim. God hides his face. His face, which is Panim, which is Panemius, is his allness. And the hiding of the face is a revelation of something else which exists also in him, which is his limitedness. And we said one of the most profound things that one can say about Hashem is just that in the same way that he has the power to be infinite, he has the power, Ein Sof, without limit, he has the power to limit himself. And that power of limiting himself is called Hester Panim, concealing his panemius. And I'm actually now just translating some words from yesterday's Tanya, just to put this on a platform, hopefully, which we'll jump off of. So he says that when he does this, hides his face, it's as if the body of the created thing is something on its own. And that language, it's as if, can make you, and is meant to make, your first thought is, well, I mean, it really isn't like that. And we spoke about that it's really an illusion, or it's really virtual. It's not really real. So that language implies that his hiding of his face is as if, it's as if the body of the created thing is a separate thing. But then he goes and he says, and even in truth, you have to know, you can't take that alone, because in truth, we also know that there is nothing besides him. And there is nothing besides him. So this that exists separately, as if it's something besides him, isn't really something besides him. Okay? So that sort of continues, and then what is this? It's a kind of a trick. Nevertheless, he says, this is not a trick. Hashem has within himself the power of infinite extension and the power of infinite limitation. And we call that power of infinite limitation his gevures, his contractedness. And we give it another name, which we will use throughout Hasidus, which is tzimtzum. He contracts himself. And this we have to hold as a paradox, that when we say he contracts himself, that does not diminish from his allness. His contracted state is a state which in God is not a contradiction. And then the Alter Rebbe says, and finally what we said yesterday, this is not within the power of the human mind to really grasp, that both limitlessness and limitedness can exist at the same time, but they do. So that's how he gives us the sense of how it is that separate things exist, really, because that's the power of his gevuras, and at the same time, they're all infused with his allness, which is the power of his chasadim, his extension, and the two exist concurrently. Okay, with that introduction, we're beginning in the middle of the page. The line begins, Mahus Habriya. Okay, and now we're going to delve more deeply into this concept of tzimtzum, because tzimtzum is what gives the world's existence. The sense of multiplicity and infinite multiplicity is as a result of the Hashem contracting himself. This level of godliness, which we call tzimtzum, contraction, condensation, the hester and concealment, that's the first expression used, hester panim, concealing his panemius, of the chayas, of the life force. Nikra b'shem kelim. These are called vessels. So here he introduces something which you may have come across before. I knew it all through Hasidus, the notion of lights and vessels, right? Now, lights and vessels, in our English terminology, they're two separate things. There's light and there's a vessel. Let's take an example. If light is flow, so we have water flows. But for water to be useful to us, it has to be captured in something so that we can take advantage of it. And the cup, the coffee cup, the thermos bottle, the water bottle, so is the vessel. And they're clearly two separate things. But we have to remember what we just learned, 30 seconds ago, that these two things do not contradict Hashem. They do not contradict each other, lights and vessels. We give terminology to them, right? One is the term connotes flow, that's called light, and the other connotes restricting the flow, which is a vessel. So this notion of infinite flow and infinite containment at the same time is the concept of lights and vessels. So the tzimtzum and the concealment is called by the name vessel. Ve'achayas atzmai, and the life force which is within it, like the unfettered water, is nikra b'shem or, is called light. So light is the flow, and vessel is the containing of the flow. Oris and kalim, lights and vessels. Okay, let me just see what we got here. Okay, yeah, background noise. Just we could just, I can't seem to find the mute button at the moment, so just hang in. Okay. Shikamei shahakeli mechasa al mashe b'soichoi. Just like a vessel not only contains, but it conceals that which is within it. Not going to open it, but okay, I'm going to have to find, have to get myself back to mute. Oh boy. There we go.
You muted yourself. You didn't mute the person. Sorry. You're still muted.
Now I'm unmuted, right? But so are you. You're all unmuted. Oh, here we go. Mute all. Yes. Okay. You can hear me, and now you're all muted. Thank you. Okay. So the keli is the container. It's the concealer. The light is the light, which is the revealer, and the two are coupled together throughout the entirety of existence. Okay. So the container is called the constriction, and the limitation is called the kelim, and the flow is called the light. Just like the keli conceals that which is within it, just like the keli conceals that which is within it. So the tzimtzum, mechaser umastir, it hides and conceals, or it conceals the light which is flowing. The light is continually flowing, because if he were to stop flowing, remember, for a minute, for a second, everything would revert to nothing. So the flow is going on constantly, and the limiting of the flow is going on constantly at the same time, so that unlimited divinity can invest itself in limited spirituality and ultimately physicality. The hakelim, so that's the light. The light is flowing through limitations, and these are called the kelim. Now, the kelim, hein ha'oisius. The vessel, the kelim are the letters. So this is a simple way of understanding this is if you take two letters in Hebrew, Aleph and Beis, right? So Aleph has a particular shape, Beis has a particular shape, right? And when you put them together, you get the word Av, which is father, which is a semantic, a meaning. There's a meaning latent in the letters, which comes out. In this case, when one is coupled with another, but if you take the letter Aleph itself, Aleph has a meaning. The letter has a meaning, which is to learn, to teach. So to convey the concept of teaching, we have a letter called Aleph. So it contains a light, which is the teaching, and it delivers it in a way that we can comprehend it, which is the vessel. So these letters and the shape of the letters, which are defined graphically, these are called the kelim. So the kelim are called letters. Sheshor shon, which the root, meaning the origin in godliness, from which these kelim come, are the hey asius, are 5 particular letters, which are collectively called minatzpach, mem, nun, sadik, pei, and langachov. There are 2 things that one can say about this. One is that, and I think this first one is in Lessons in Tanya, that each of them has a quality that they have a final letter. There's a final mem, a final nun, final tzaddik pei, and so they have a normative, kind of letter, which is the ones we're seeing, and then let's take the mem. Then there's the shlosh mem, which is the end. So there's the norm, and that indicates a certain kind of light, and then there's the form of the light, which is the final, which has a different form, which is the keli. In another way, the letters have the quality of every letter that you're saying has to have a breath in it. It's coming from the throat. Coming from earlier than the throat, the windpipe. There's breath in everything. That's the light. That's the flow. And each of these letters correspond to one particular quality of the vocal system. There's the throat. There's the palate. There's the tongue, the teeth, and the lips. 5 of them. These are called the He Motsoi Sapeh, the 5 ways in which the light, the breath, is formed into different kalim in order to express words. So these letters now become an analogy. Just we had like the sun and its rays. The letters also become an analogy for a light and a container. So these are the 5 oisius minatzpach, which they have light in them. There's a mem, there's a nun, and they form themselves in ways which have closeness, endness, and they're particularly clipped, shortened by the 5 articulated powers of the mouth. That's another, and so this becomes a metaphor also for lights and vessels. Shehein ha'gevuras. So these minatzpach, these 5 letters, which have the qualities we just described, these are the gevuras. They're the restraint on the light or the flow of life force, which is coming from the chest, the windpipe. So they're called the ha'gevuras. Excuse me. Shehen hegevuras, hamishalachas umafrichas hahevel, which they limit, divide up, and separate the breath, the hakol boy, and the call, and the breath, the he motsoi sapeh, in these 5 articulative powers of the breath, the throat, the palate, the tongue, lips, and teeth. This havis kof bois oisius. That's how you get the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. The shoresh ha'gevuras. Now, the source of these 5 gevuras, he butsina de kardonita. This is an Aramaic expression. Butsina is light, and kardonita is darkness. The source of the gevuras is that light which is dark, and that itself, of course, is a paradox. Light illuminates, but there's something called, and modern physics has instantiated this, called dark light. Dark light. So don't think that the kalim are not godly, that they're not light. The light of God, they are. But they're light in appearance of darkness. Whereas the or versus the keli, the light of the keli is unmasked. It reveals itself as light. But both of them at source are instantiations of godly light. One in a light way and one in a dark way. But it's all elokus, and elokus is godliness. So this is called the limiting stuff, the kalim, right? The letters, right, are dark lights because they're limiting. Shehi gavura iloh, and they come from the place in godliness itself, which is called the supernal gavuras. So this thing goes back to just as he has the quality of complete extension, unlimited, which is or, he in his very self has also the quality of limitations, which is choshech, which is darkness. Again, 2 opposites, which in the panemius of godliness itself, there's no contradiction. It's only as it comes out that there's a contradiction, and it's important that contradiction, because number one, there would be no creation without the Gavuras, right? The instantiation of separateness, and that creation would be godless, meaning have no divinity flowing through it, if it weren't for the fact that Hashem that there is nothing besides God. even though there is everything in its apparent way that looks like not godly, doesn't reveal its godliness. That's Hester Panim, that's Tzimtzum, that's Kalim, right? Vessels. There is or within it all the time. Otherwise, it couldn't exist. So this limiting factor is called, or the dark light is called, its source is in what's called Gevura Iloah, the supernal Gevuras, constraint, holding back the light. And that source is in a place which is called in Aramaic and in Kabbalah, Atik Yomin, literally the Ancient of Days. The Ancient of Days refers to a level in Keser, in the crown of Hashem, where everything that ever will be, ever was, is, and will be, exists in a primordial state before it's actually instantiated as something. That's called Atik Yomin, where it's all there. Light, darkness there have no tangible reality, but they're there. And since they have no tangible reality, they don't contradict each other at all. They're all part of the singularity of God. And that singularity, that place of which there are deeper places, but generally what Kabbalah and Hasidus speak about as the deep place is called Atik Yomin, the Ancient of Days. So the Gevuras, he said, they are up there in that place called the Ancient of Days, deep in God's consciousness. And the source of the kindnesses, which is the illumination, the hispashtus, the spreading out, is Gamkein. There, Chesed is called the Chesed of Atik Yomin. There's the Gevura of Atik Yomin and the Chesed of Atik Yomin. There within the singularity of God is a latent, or the better word is primordial, possibility for the expression of two totally opposites, both which exist as a singularity in God himself. Ki Yedua, as is known, Yudeis Chochmah Nestoros, to those who know the Kabbalistic concepts. All right, that's today's Tanya. I'm interested to hear, we've had a good discussion yesterday, but I think we hopefully have got it, that the contradiction is not a contradiction, right? As we said, he's the one who's able to bear opposites. He can be extended infinitely and oppositely limited infinitely at the same time. The question is, what difference does that make to us? Ubechein. Any thoughts? Why do we care?
We're learning about the one we love.
Yeah. And what have we learned about the one we love?
That he's impossible to wrap our heads around.
Yeah, good. And therefore, that creates a little bit, even as you hear your voice, sort of a sense of uplift, a sense of, it brings in a sense of wonder. It brings in the sense of a reality, the recognition that there are sublime things beyond me, and they're so sublime because I have this feeling of love and being drawn toward them.
And also, it's like a hologram, because if you look at someone and then you think what we just learned, you kind of like see their spirit and their godliness, and then you refocus, and then you see them as a person.
Right. Good. And with your mind's eye, with your koyach hamuna, I keep coming back to this. This is shar yichud ve'emuna, which I've called the evidence of things unseen. This is what this helps. Hopefully, we're getting at that. We're beginning to get a sense of something that is totally unseen, and its magnificence is that it's totally unseen, and a sense of the magnificence of Hashem. I'm elaborating on what you're saying with my own, putting in my own 2 cents, but that's where I go with this. Anybody else? Somebody's got a hand up. Who's got a hand up? Hayanka, yeah.
Well, I had more of a question. I'm trying to understand what the difference is, the letters in the alphabet that have a final sound.
The letters of the alphabet, when they have a final sound, are indicative of finality, of limitation.
Oh, okay.
Sofit. That's
Right.
in Hebrew. They express end, and end is limitation, right? And he says these five letters, they're equal to the Hey Gavoris, the 5 ways of limiting. So that's why they're end letters.
Okay.
You get that? Yes?
Yeah. So
Okay.
that's bringing down Hashem into more finite.
Yeah. It's bringing down the expression of the gavuras of Hashem, the limitations of Hashem, which ultimately, yes, is responsible for the fact that there are finite things, and that everything isn't solely infinite. But of course, the real big news is that it's both infinite and finite at the same time.
And I think, for the Bachain, for me,
Mm-hmm.
it's that whenever we're experiencing difficulties, seeing the world as tough as it is,
Mm-hmm.
realizing that ain't no Milvado, there's nothing else. It's all coming from Hashem.
Yeah.
Even though everything is looking so dark, that it's still
It
coming
still is
from
God.
Hashem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's a huge behemoth. To keep that, it is huge. That's Emunah, or B'tochen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Anybody else? Okay, then we'll keep those things in mind, at least for the next few seconds, minutes, hours. And we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.